Nintendo has always been great at putting their own spin on a genre. The phenomenon of Splatoon is by far the best example of this, taking the formulaic first-person shooter style and giving it a fresh new coat of paint. Something similar happened with Pikmin and the real-time strategy genre, but I don't feel like it was done as concisely then. I'm not gonna claim that's why it didn't share the same success as Splatoon, but I would point to it as a contributing factor. Don't get me wrong, I adore Pikmin. Easily one of my favorite Nintendo franchises, top 5 minimum. But when I look at this, look at other RTSs, and think of what Pikmin could be, I find the current games a little lacking. Well, lacking might be the wrong word. More full of potential. There's a clear avenue the series could grow while retaining everything that makes the series stellar now, to translate the keyboard-reliant frenzy of the RTS into a console format, while still being accessible to beginners. And since it feels like we're not going to even hear about Pikmin 4 again, why not take some time to dream up some ways that game could function should it ever see the light of day? I know it's odd given the intro we just had, but we're going to start with a basic story pitch here. It'll lay the groundwork that will make explaining the rest of this much easier. Picking up after the end of Pikmin 3, spoiler warning by the way, Olimar returns to his home planet only to learn that there is a catastrophe afoot. What is this catastrophe? Doesn't matter, it's a plot point. Maybe the planet is suffering from overpopulation, or areas are becoming uninhabitable. Perhaps a black hole is approaching. Or we could just go the full ridiculous angle and say the giant, ravenous space bunnies that Louis lied about in Pikmin 2 are actually real, and swarms of them are starting to threaten the planet itself. Regardless the reason, after some time spent researching and panicking, it becomes clear that Hawkatate could be in very real danger, and that it may be wise to invest in a new home. But none can be found. There's no suitable planets nearby. The situation seems hopeless, up until Olimar receives a transmission. It's from Louis. If you recall, Louis was left behind on the planet PNF 404 at the end of Pikmin 3. And given how they forgot to check he was on the ship in the first place, it stands to reason that nobody remembered to go back to get him. After all, they just learned about a planetary disaster. Priorities shifted. They weren't there in the first place, but they did shift. But, surprise surprise, Louis is fine. Thriving, actually. He calls Olimar to let him know that while he's sure that there's a rescue operation being planned to retrieve him, he doesn't actually want to go back. He's grown accustomed to living with a Pikmin. There's limitless food here, and he finds it to be significantly better than life back on Hawkatate. This is when Olimar realizes what he must do. Despite the air not being breathable, he's lasted some long stretches of time on PNF 404, and if Louis can do it, anybody can. So he resolves to spearhead an expedition to secure a colony for his people on the Pikmin homeworld. And I know that opens up a lot of questions and worries, but never fear. Every core concept of Pikmin remains intact. The idea is not to change the game, it's to add on to the game. Think of Fire Emblem Three Houses. That game introduces oodles of new mechanics. Walking around the monastery, interacting with students, customizing their growth, cooking, going fishing, and talking to this delightful fellow. But if that's not your cup of tea, if you just want to jump straight forward to the next battle, missing out on half the awesome content, but hey, that's your choice, you can do that. The same would be possible here. If you just want to hop from day to day and keep that classic Pikmin experience unchanged, that option is available. The basic gameplay is the same. Venture out, gather materials, manage your Pikmin wisely, and return to safety when night falls. So you'll be just fine. But for the rest of us, let's talk about what colonization would mean. The game would start out like any other Pikmin adventure. Olimar is dropping down to the planet during the day, trying to gather resources and scout the area, but instead of treasure hunting or repairing his ship, he's trying to find a safe place to live, along with building materials to establish that initial base. Once that hub is claimed, let's say inside a hollowed out airtight game cube that Louis's been living in, because come on, how awesome would that be? Olimar is here to stay. No longer leaving at night, he now takes refuge inside this classic game console. And that's where things become very interesting. Having a hub brings base management into the Pikmin series. Now for those that don't know what that would entail, let me show you an example from XCOM 2. Between the tactical turn-based missions blasting away aliens, you return to this mobile hub ship, which you can customize in various ways. Want a facility to build automated turrets or robots? You have it right here. There's infirmaries to heal your units faster, training areas to teach soldiers special skills, laboratories to research new ways of using the alien technology you find. But you don't have the resources to make them all, at least all at once. So, which do you prioritize? I want something similar in Pikmin. Say Louis and Olimar find this strange invigorator juice. By studying and replicating it, they can develop stims for themselves and the Pikmin to temporarily make themselves much faster at the cost of crashing after the effects wear off. Or maybe studying isn't your thing. You want to train up your Pikmin. To do that, you can jury-rig an incubator to replicate sunlight, at the cost of some courage reactors, of course. This will passively cause the Pikmin to bloom and grow, even when they're not out in the field with you. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. It's a bit cramped inside this GameCube already. There's no room for these facilities. So we venture out and find some useful stuff. Same thing as regular old Pikmin, scrounging up every object you can find because maybe it's useful. But on top of random knickknacks and food, you're also gathering basic building materials. Wood, stone, that sort of thing. This would be a great way to introduce new Pikmin that specialize in those tasks. Perhaps you find some sharp Pikmin. Little brown Kabutops-esque creatures with very elongated sharp arms. Not great at carrying things, though fantastic in combat, these little guys have a knack for chopping up wood and plant matter, excelling at gathering those building materials so long as you have some other Pikmin around to carry what they chop up. Need some sand to make glass? Or to refresh a water supply? Well, it's rather difficult for regular Pikmin to carry those sorts of things, so why not try the Spitter Pikmin? This green, slightly translucent Pikmin has a very large mouth, which it uses to devour dirt or sand or water or whatever, and spit it at the faces of predators, temporarily blinding them. On top of that, these green Pikmin can stretch very easily. They can keep eating or drinking until they're practically spherical. They are almost helpless on their own in this state, but if you command other Pikmin to carry them, you can easily transport the materials they have gathered. Now with those basic materials, alongside any larger important objects you find, you can expand your single GameCube into a ramshackle cluster of repurposed dwellings. This new room will allow additional explorers to come aid you, which in turn results in more potential ways to interact with your game. For example, Alf, Brittany, and Charlie show up first, and along with accompanying you on missions, if you so choose, each runs their own shop of sorts, where you can bring the materials to enhance your Pikmin experience. Alf is an engineer, so he'll assist in studying the strange technology found on this planet, using it to upgrade the base and your equipment. That incubator we mentioned earlier would probably be his handiwork. He could also set up stellar orbs around your base to ward off predators, powering everything with yellow Pikmin generators. Brittany, on the other hand, is a botanist, growing and studying various plants, in particular food. Those invigorator stims would be her creation, and there could be other consumables that she makes to help in various ways. And big old Charlie just wants to protect his teammates. This place is dangerous at night after all. Giant monsters could attack at any moment, so he'll organize the defenses. Over time, others would show up as well, either from Hocotate or Copite or maybe some entirely new alien species. We could have a biologist that studies the animals, providing tools to deal with them more effectively, or a beastmaster that tries to tame them, with varying results of success. How about a traveling merchant? One who buys excess materials and treasures in exchange for wacky alien technology. Perhaps even a geneticist that can alter the Pikmin themselves. Allow yellow Pikmin to store electricity instead of simply conducting it. Allow white Pikmin to give off poisonous clouds. Or merge two Pikmin types together to create entirely new species. All of these characters would serve as the main cast of the game. The brave explorers working together to secure ground for a new Hocotation home. But I want to focus on Charlie's role in particular, because that opens up an entirely new kind of Pikmin experience. Defensive missions. And it was at this point of the quit concept that many people threw up their hands and complained that I was just making Pikmin into a mobile game Clash of Clans clone. Ha! Now listen here. If your only exposure to defensive strategy is Clash of Clans, you need to expand your horizons. What we are doing here is taking the Pikmin formula of rewarding players for multitasking and applying it in a different way. Imagine this basic setup. You've got some choke points that you can block creatures advancing through with various defenses, created by the materials you have gathered. You can build basic walls, place boulders to be rolled down hills, Alf can provide those stellar orbs to blind monsters as they approach. And as you unlock better technology and teach your Pikmin to use it, you could make catapults that fire bomb rocks, Pikmin-manned ballistas that fire needles at your foes, and various other miniature siege tactics. And while the defenses would be built on a grid like a traditional RTS, the actual mission plays out in classic Pikmin gameplay. But instead of switching between captains to efficiently gather resources, you're instead swapping between them to man multiple defensive fronts at once. These missions would be scattered throughout the nights of the main campaign, while during the day you scout for an area large enough to found a proper Hooray city. You'll have to hurry to do so before Hooray reaches a point of no return, and you'll have to manage your own supplies to keep the operation going, so you're pushed for time on multiple fronts. But just like the previous games, that time limit is rarely a threat, just a reminder that you have to keep working. And once you complete that task, much like in Pikmin 2, you are still free to explore these areas to the fullest, to unlock the true ending of the game. But we split in two directions at this point. You can continue following Olimar's story as he and his team face a new threat to their newly founded home, or you can oversee the efforts of this new colony yourself. And I do mean yourself. Olimar has his own base now. This is Pikmin HQ. He doesn't have time to look after a colony. He has important missions to run. No. Olimar starts looking through the backgrounds of potential candidates to run it for him, the screen fades to black, and suddenly, you are in a character creator. Separately from the main story, an optional, open-ended side story plays out. Your story, as you lead your colony to greatness. You can customize just about everything about this place. The location you build it, the layout of the colony, the research you pursue, how you construct your defenses, the Pikmin counts, the resource counts, the names and appearances of the captains you hire to fight alongside you. Everything can be influenced by the player. But despite all this base management, we're still playing Pikmin here, venturing to areas to gather materials. We just have an extremely customizable base on top of that. However, we don't have access to the same levels Olimar does. No, these ones are a bit smaller, more like the challenge missions in Pikmin 3, or the dungeon levels in Pikmin 2. Each of these levels would have a separate resource focus. One's good for farming Pikmin, another is underground and great for minerals. Some materials are rarer than others. Bosses will show up sometimes. And while this might not be possible due to how detailed Pikmin worlds are, I would love for these areas to be randomly generated, at least to an extent, very much taking inspiration from dungeon crawlers. This mode is where multiplayer comes into play, a necessity of RTSs that Pikmin desperately needs, but has only dabbled with in the past. Throughout the main story, you'll receive memos from Olimar's boss that there are tons of other companies and organizations that are also trying to establish colonies on various other areas of the planet. These represent other players, who may have their own Olimars from their point of view, but in your narrative, they represent potential allies, or rivals. You can choose to interact with these other colonies in various ways. You can trade with your friends, make joint efforts to collect resources in extremely difficult areas, visit their colonies and host adorable Pikmin Ewok celebrations. Or, if you so choose, you can go to war. The Pikmin world has always been slightly supernatural, sentient. There's phenomenons here that can't be explained. And with all these new aliens on the planet, something has awoken that is causing the colonists and wildlife to become enraged. Some kind of hive mind is taking control of them, pushing them to destroy the other colonies. Olimar's story will feature him combating the source of this infection, but the multiplayer colonies will deal with the more mundane skirmishes. This is where some side competitive online modes can come into play, where your enemies will appear as this evil infected faction and you appear that way to them. Lots of cool ways this can happen. Say your scanner picks up an extremely valuable item, but warns that this evil faction is on its way to retrieve it. This starts a player versus player battle mode, where you try to make your way through an area, defeat a large monster, claim the useful resource, all while driving off the other player's attacks as they try to do the same. If you lose that struggle, perhaps you'd rather attack your enemies at their source and raid their base. This style of competition can appear in two ways. Either you attack a preset base with preset defenses, simply running a gauntlet that another player has created, or you fight another player as they man their own defenses. Can you imagine how cool that could be? A Pikmin army laying siege to a Pikmin fortress? Pikmin battering rams and Pikmin trebuchets? You could use Rob the Robot or Chibi Robo, who in this world would act as giant super weapons to attack or defend bases. And I know the words base raid sound some alarm bells, but don't you worry. While you do gain resources for winning these battles, you don't lose them if you fail. Again, in your opponent's eyes, you are these nasty, infected colonists. The base they are attacking is not your base, it's an alternate reality infected version of it. There's no always online element. You don't have to constantly check your base every day to repair things, as the only thing that's damaged when you lose is your pride, as well as some points in a ranking system. And you know what the best part of all this is? It's all optional. A side campaign, repurposing assets from the main game into something more multiplayer focused. You're just trying to build and support a thriving colony. You can win if you'd like, max out every resource, defeat every boss, fill out a compendium and top the competitive charts, but your colony persists as long as you'd like it to, allowing you to try new layouts and strategies, providing the game with some longevity. The only way to finish the game is through Olimar's story, and even then, this mode would continue on its own, locked to a timeline where the conflict hasn't been resolved. And what is that resolution? Well, obviously you stop the infection. Cure those colonists, the day is saved. PNF 404 becomes new Hakatate. But how is that victory measured? You know how Pikmin games work. Depending on how many things you find, it gives you a different ending. You either escape the planet or crash back down, save your world from starvation or doom them to wither away. But that doesn't really work here. There's only a time limit to get the colony set up. Past that, you have all the time in the world to grind up to researching everything, maxing out every possible avenue that you can find. There's no point measuring that as your success, so we're not going to. Instead, let me ask you a question. Should you max out everything? You have so many options before you, so many ways to improve your Pikmin. But what happens if you meddle too much? One of the major themes of Pikmin is working with nature to survive against nature. It's a symbiotic relationship, one that you really care about. But how far will you go? What are you willing to do to save the infected? What if this game's ending was not determined by how successful you are? What if it's determined by how the player treats the Pikmin? Do you allow them to thrive? Give them recreational activities to keep them happy? Devote resources that are desperately needed to save the infected? Or do you push them forward for the greater good? That power plant needs fuel to burn, and you don't have enough resources for that. Do you let the colony go dark, risking destruction? Or do you throw some Pikmin in there to keep things running? Do you pump your soldiers so full of steroids that they're unbeatable, wiping out the entire ecosystem? What happens as those modifications start to eat away at the Pikmin's personalities? As they act less and less cheerful around you? They stop singing as they march, stop emoting while standing still, just watching their commander with blank stares, silently, emotionlessly waiting for their next command. And how about the planet? Do you strip it of all resources or leave enough to grow back on its own? These variables, both in the main story and multiplayer, would determine how your game ends. You can live harmoniously alongside the Pikmin or become their slave masters, found a permanent home or be forced to find another. Perhaps you treat the Pikmin so poorly but leave enough of their free will intact that they rebel, turning you into the slaves and they the masters. Depending on these variables, there could be quite a few endings, encouraging players to replay with different strategies. And with that, I think we've carried over the rest of the real-time strategy aspects that Pikmin currently lacks, in a way that keeps the core formula of the game mostly unchanged. So long as a Fire Emblem approach is taken to keep a classic way to play the game intact, I truly believe that this is the best avenue for the series to grow. In fact, I don't think it's that far-fetched for something like this to happen. We definitely wouldn't get everything I listed off here. Pikmin doesn't sell well enough to justify that extra work, but I would not be surprised to see at least some of these elements appear in the next installment, assuming it ever actually comes out. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video. I know it's a very broad range of topics I'm presenting here, feeling a bit of a quantity over quality vibe looking back on this, but I hope the general vision of what I'm going for translated through. Like it or not, I hope it at least sparks some ideas in your head of what Pikmin 4 could be, and I would love to hear those ideas in the comments below. I know it was a very long wait for this video, If it hasn't become apparent already, it takes me a while to make these. But for this one especially, it was a bumpy ride to the finish. I moved houses, the whole Copa panic, and just general holiday stress. But most of that is past us now, so hopefully things will pick up on this channel going forward. And that's definitely the first time I've made that claim. But at the very least, I've got a bunch of smaller, simpler videos coming soon, so things will definitely be active for at least a little bit. I want to give a massive thanks to the patrons that have and do support me. With how crazy life has gotten, that extra support has gone a long way to keeping me sane. Hopefully I can pay you back with some cool content, like our next big improving video. We're going to be tackling a Smash Bros. Veteran, the one whose design annoys me more than any other fighter. And I think you know him well. See you then.